everyone. Thanks for joining us today for Nonprofit Fundamentals. I'm April Kushner, and I'm joined with Adam Holzberg. So while Adam and I are both public accountants, I want to let you know a little secret. Adam was also a history major. So today, for any of you history folks, we're going to talk a little bit about philanthropy, nonprofits, and the government, and where we started years ago and where we are today, and how nonprofits really came to be in terms of their funding and their missions and what they do. So, does that sum it up pretty good?
I think so. So, full disclosure, I think I convinced April for this topic. Mm-hmm. She was a little confused, but she agreed. Not particularly happy, I guess, but she agreed. So, let's talk about the history of philanthropy in America, where we were, and how did we get to where we are today. And, history in general kind of helps shape, tells us a story of where we were and potentially where we're going. So when you're looking at history, it's not just the past, it's also giving you some information on where you're potentially heading towards, because history does tend to repeat itself. So it does give us some valuable information. So I guess with that, I'm going to just dive right in. So charity in the United States really began as more of a community base, helping your neighbor. This is, the colonial era where people are coming over from Europe, settling in what's now the United States, and everyone was dependent on each other for survival. So it's very community-based. As time went on, as things got more structured, everything was more established, it was still community-based, and a topic started rising of, should charity be helping individuals, direct aid, or should we be targeting the cause of society's ills? Which, I think still tends to be an argument. Do we help the individual, or do we target the issue, causing the individual to be homeless or food insecure or something along those lines? So I think that debate's never really changed, and that debate has started right from the very beginning, the United States, or what will become the United States. So that's how charity got a start. It was very also, like I said, community-based. It was focused on religion. Religion definitely had a big influence on charity. But it was, neighbors helping neighbors is how charity started here in the United States. So, moving on. So we get through that, and during this time, as the United States was founded, in its early history, the role of government was no real direct involvement with, the citizens. It was definitely a hands-off role. There was taxation and stuff, but there was no direct services, no direct aid to individuals. So government was hands-off. Charities handled anything that we would consider, the social safety net. Government was more providing, defense, foreign policy. Domestic spending was always a debate if government can or should spend domestically on just infrastructure in general. So social spending itself was not really part of the question. And that's really for the beginning part of the history where things kind of lied. Now let's fast forward. So now we're going to the late 19th century, early 20th. So we're almost to modern times. You're along for the ride right here.
Yep.
You're riding shotgun. So this is where we get to the Gilded Age, when you have the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, the J.P. Morgans. This is the rise of the ultra wealthy, and that was also the rise of private foundations, which still exist today. Basically, at that time, the ultra wealthy had a philosophy of, while, labor conditions were terrible, they also felt it was their responsibility to help and provide those less fortunate than themselves. So private foundations kind of sprung up. Carnegie himself established tons of libraries, very big into education. Each of these individuals kind of had their own pet projects. And this was also going back into that original debate of, do charities, do they help individuals directly, or do we attack the root causes of issues? So these private foundations, they were attacking the root causes of these issues. They believed direct aid was not appropriate. There was always this belief that if you help a person directly, that'll just keep them in that condition.
That's a really interesting point, though.
So, at that time, private foundations, funding a lot of great stuff in the country, but not really helping individuals directly. That was still the MO of charity at this time.
So that's how private foundations came to be.
Yep. Ultra wealthy individuals felt it was their...
to fund the mission.
Yep. Felt it was their duty to provide to everyone else. So, now let's fast forward a little bit more. Now we're in the 1930s, the Great Depression. Now things start changing dramatically. As you can imagine, charities who were always kind of the ones in charge of social safety net were completely not able to deal with the amount of individuals who needed assistance, whether it was homelessness or hunger or whatever it was. The country was in bad shape. Charity could not handle it. This is really the first time that government stepped in and started getting involved in the social safety net, basically. And
because of the demand.
The demand was just massive. And people were demanding help. So this is when you start getting all the, like they like to call it the alphabet soup of programs during the New Deal. Lots of different programs. This was all government run. The government did not partner with nonprofits at this time. So every program was directly funded and run by a government agency that was providing support to individuals. But this was a big shift because this is now government now fully entering into the realm of, like I said, the safety net. So we fast forward again. Now we're in the 1960s. This is another huge shift in policy, and it also kind of targets of, shows us where we are today. So in the 1960s, that was during the time of the Great Society, the number of programs implemented by Lyndon Johnson. One of those changes was a modification to Social Security, Title 20 of the Social Security Act, which now allowed the government to subcontract to nonprofits. And this was a big change. This is where government funding to nonprofits really came about. So with the Great Society, government now started funding nonprofits directly to help the individuals. So this is, for every nonprofit that's funded by the government, this is where it began during the 1960s. There's several additional programs that came about, like Head Start, things of that nature. CDBG grants came about during this time. But this was really a big shift away from philanthropy always being funded by private individuals, private foundations, and now government has stepped into that realm as well and subcontracted to nonprofits. So that was the 60s. It grew further in the 70s. It really defined that public-private partnership between the two. And then we get to the 1980s. And then the government spending takes a step back. This was during the Reagan era. There were a number of domestic cuts. This is where the philosophy of do more or less really came about for nonprofits. Once the genie was out of the bottle with government funding nonprofits, you really couldn't go back anymore. But there was definitely cuts of funding. This is where block grants to states came about. So block grants are just a set amount of funding to the state, and the states are told to just figure it out when it comes to their priorities. So nonprofits then had to deal with the ramifications of that. Still now being subcontracted by the government to provide services, but need to do more with less. Now we're going to the 1990s.
Okay.
How's the ride?
Interesting.
So now in the 1990s, you had welfare reform under Bill Clinton, and this really cemented the role of nonprofits as an extension of the government with the social safety net. Government fully relied on nonprofits to really provide the services. This also was a time when a lot of regulations came about for nonprofits. This is where, a lot of different compliance requirements came through during this time. So nonprofits really, at this point in time, really cemented their role as fully in the social safety net, but also as extension of the government.
Mm-hmm.
So, since that time, there's been a lot of ups and downs. Private funding is still a huge player in the space. But with government being in the realm, a lot of nonprofits have been very reliant on government funding. There was a report, I think, from 2021 that showed government funding between federal, state, and local was $261 billion in nonprofits. I think from the latest Giving USA report, all private funding was $590 billion.
Okay.
Does that sound right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you can see the role of government. So $590 billion from individuals, corporations, foundations, $261 billion from government. So government has a very huge role in the space, and now we get to the present. There's been additional cuts to programs. There's been shifting priorities. If government was ever to step out completely from the realm of philanthropy, that would be a seismic shock to the sector, to the industry, where private funding really can't make up the difference. We've kind of positioned nonprofits as fully within our social safety net. We want the nonprofits who are on the ground within the communities to really, they know best on who needs the help. And if there's any more changes with government spending with that, they won't be able to do that. Mm-hmm. And like I said, private funding really can make up the difference there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We've mentioned that in a couple of our webinars, right?
Yeah.
About huge shifts in government funding that philanthropy is not going to be able to make up the difference.
So that's essentially the quick and dirty of the history of philanthropy. It went from completely privately funded to government stepping in, to government not still stepping in, but then subcontracting to nonprofits to handle the work. And now it's kind of a private-public relationship. You have private funding involved. There's different priorities based on who's doing the funding, which has always been there since the beginning of private foundations, where you have individuals kind of set their priorities, fund those priorities, and other priorities kind of fall to the wayside. So the dynamics for the past 150 years really haven't changed too much. So based on that, where do you think we're heading?
I think we're still going to see a combination of government funding and philanthropy, but I'm hopeful that we won't see too many government cuts, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But it's true. It's funding those individuals in our communities, and helping those who are in need is a really big piece of our society.
So charity, philanthropy is not going anywhere. It's just now what's its role going to continue? I think it's still going to remain, the social safety net of the United States is really managed by the nonprofits. Mm-hmm. So, in the end of the day, I think government funding is going to remain where it is. Maybe less, maybe more, based on the administration, but I don't think that's going to change. And, the role of private funding is always going to be there. It's always definitely an important part of the sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting point.
So, that was my
Well, thank you
my
for
history lesson.
Thank you for the history
I
lesson.
finally got to use my history love for a video.
Absolutely. So thank you for telling us all about the evolution
And you stayed
of the
awake for
funding.
it.
I did.
Yeah.
Thank you for telling us about the evolution of nonprofits and how they've been funded over all these years. So hope you all enjoyed it.
Thank you.